Hey, you know what time it is? Oh, you read the title, so of course you know what time it is. It's time to offend people on the internet with my opinions. And what a magical time that is. Oh, and more importantly, mispronouncing characters' names. I'm sorry, guys. Really not intentional. I'm trying over here. But as my banner says, I am trash. If this list sounds a little bit too positive for you and you'd rather hear some negative opinions, check out my top 10 worst constellations in the game video. I am sure you will probably hate some of my opinions, if not most of them. For constellations that are good, there's a lot more to choose from than the truly awful ones. And thank God for that. So I decided to split the 4 stars and 5 stars up this time. That, and I am really not qualified to be judging most of the 5-star constellations in this game because I don't own most of the constellations in this game. And I believe that some of them take a little bit of personal experience to really feel just how good or bad they are. For example, Raiden Shoguns. A lot of people think that it's just awful just by looking at it. I personally think it at least has some potential, and maybe just people haven't found that out yet. But then it's easy to look at ones like Eula C6 and be like, yeah, that does a shitload of damage. So I'm going to consider many different factors for this list, such as damage output, ease of obtaining them, utility, and how generally useful it is. For example, Ningguang C6 is very powerful, but only for her, and she can't just be slotted into any team and expect to be a natural fit like some of the 4-star supports we have. So with that in mind, Rosaria's C2. Duration increasing constellations are always powerful ones, and it's a common trend you're going to see on this list for the most part. As long as you're not some giga whale clearing things in 5 seconds, these kind of nodes will bring you a lot of power and general usability out of a character. Rosaria's is one of the more potent duration increasers we have, bringing a 50% increase to her burst duration. The only reason this isn't higher up on the list is because Rosaria's burst itself is not as sought after as some of the other supports' bursts. Sarah's C2 makes Sarah a lot simpler to use and more versatile, and that is typically one of the biggest complaints people have about Sarah. They think she feels clunky to get her buff. Many people dislike having to use her charge attack to get the buff, and this allows you to skip that requirement entirely. But if you choose to utilize both, you can buff 2 characters instead of just the one, which is very useful for snapshotting her buff on a support, and then immediately switching back to Sarah using her charge attack to buff your main DPS. Regardless of how you personally feel about Sarah, this makes her significantly better as a support unit and takes away one of the more annoying requirements from her. Sayu C1 is a very solid constellation. It'll allow her burst to deal damage and heal simultaneously, and it's the first constellation in her tree, so it's extremely accessible to just about anyone. She's got some solid healing, and her burst can swirl and give you VV procs. There's really not much else to say about this constellation. It makes her burst a lot better, and she's a good character. Diona C6. This is a very powerful flat elemental mastery buff. It's often used to create massive damage numbers with bursts like Hu Tao's or Child's, as well as just up the power level of any reaction-based teams. It is, however, a C6, attached to a 20-second cooldown burst, and it has a requirement of being over half health to be active, which isn't a big ask considering she is a healer, but this does all keep it from being higher on the list. The one advantage of this is since Diona is a healer and a shielder and a cryo character, it's really not that big of an ask to add her onto your teams. Fischl C6 is a massive buff to Oz, and Oz is pretty much 100% of the reason any of us run Fischl. It makes him do a ton more damage than he already does, and makes him last a little bit longer, bringing his uptime to effectively almost 100%. On top of the base damage that this constellation adds, it really amps up the electrostatus applications that Fischl can provide, which is pretty much most of the reason we run Fischl. Sucrose is C1. Now I feel like a lot of you are going to see this high up on this list and be like, what the fuck is he thinking? But this constellation is a big one for Sucrose. It ups her energy gain, allowing her to be a potent battery for not only herself but other Animo characters such as Xiao, but it also gives Sucrose double the chance to proc Sacrificial Tome, which is pretty damn important for her, especially against small groups of enemies or if you're fighting something like Magu Kenki. Xingqiu's C2. This is another duration increasing constellation that brings his burst up to a near 100% uptime, and we like that in constellations. On top of that already powerful effect, this has a built-in hydro resistance shred on it, and it's honestly shocking just how generous this constellation is for being early on in his tree, especially if you compare it to someone like Beto's C6, which has the same level of shred for Electro, just in a small AoE around her while her burst is active. And speaking of Beto, Beto's C2. Beto's lightning bounces between enemies. Once there are at least 2 enemies, Beto destroys everything. C2 equals more bounces. More bounces, more death. More death, more good. How this wasn't her C6 is beyond me. I really don't get it. It's insane for a C2. It increases the damage of her burst by a potential 66%. Now, why isn't a constellation this broken topping this list? Well, that's because it's situational. You do need 2 targets at least to make Beto's burst work fully, and they need to be close enough together to bounce. That's not always a huge ask in Genshin Impact due to the AoE nature of Spiral Abyss in most cases, but there will be times where it's just not in the cards. Xiangling C4. By now, everyone has had it drilled into their brain that Pyronado is a pure destructive force in most teams that she is in. So what's better than Pyronado? A Pyronado that lasts 40% longer. The biggest downside to Pyronado is the long cooldown and 50% base uptime. This at least brings it up to almost 75% uptime so we can keep the natural disaster from hell that we'd love to be on the field at all times. Bennett C1. Unlike the worst constellations video, I did not disqualify Bennett from being on this list because there's no reason to. Bennett C1 is what makes Bennett Bennett. Without this, we would almost never get his sweet attack buff because this boy heals so goddamn much even without investment that it would be near impossible for us to get any meaningful amount of duration out of his buff for longer than anything but snapshotting. Like sure, you could potentially just get the attack buff long enough to snapshot, but that's not why Bennett is broken. Without this C1, we would be in a lot of situations where we would be purposely trying to get ourselves hurt just to activate his buff. Oh, and if you wanted to use Zhongli and Bennett together, too bad, f*** you. That would not work at all. Aside from just enabling him to do what he does best, this also has the added benefit of increasing the attack scaling that his burst does. Again, just ridiculously generous for a C1. If I made this list with the 4 stars and 5 stars combined like I'd originally planned, I probably would have still put this at the top of the list. I don't care if Eula's C6 lets you Thanos snap anything you want out of existence because it's a goddamn limited C6 which costs thousands of dollars. This is a 4-star C1 that literally every player has access to some degree. For those of you out there who roll on Bennett banners and never get him, I feel sorry for you. You're really missing out. I hope you get him soon. And that's it. That's the list. You probably noticed now this was almost all duration increasing or added functionality constellations. Duration increasers are always extremely potent, especially when they're buffing up the sole reason we run the character in the first place. Most of them were auto includes, and it was really just a matter of ordering them after that, which, you know, if you disagree with the order, it's fine. Ask me again in 2 weeks, I'd probably order some of it differently myself. If you made it to the end here, thank you for watching. Maybe consider subscribing. I make a mix of content, some informative, some opinions like this one, and some are just meant for comedy. Like maybe you want to watch me obsess over Arataki Ito for 4.5 minutes straight. Regardless of your choice, I appreciate you being here, and I am out.
Freeze to the core!